I hope today you will all have a very meaningful day and an easy fast. Rabbi Spilker mentioned on Rosh Hashanah that we have been a survey-starved congregation. So in the very best interest of Mount Zion, I have a little survey I'd like to take with you this morning, if you'll indulge me. If you grew up in another country, please raise your hand. Keep them up. If you grew up in another state, please raise your hand. Keep them up. If you grew up in a different neighborhood than where you live now, please raise your hand. If you were not raised at Mount Zion, please raise your hand. I can see there are still some of you left. If you have ever started a new school or a new job or gone shopping at a new mall, please raise your hand. Okay, everybody look around. Keep your hands up. Look around. Now you can put your hands down. If you had your hand up, then you can probably relate to the words from Exodus. You shall not oppress the stranger, for you know the heart of the stranger. The verse goes on to remind us that we know the heart of the stranger because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. But really, we have all been strangers in much more recent memory. I invite you to get in touch with your inner stranger. We've all been strangers in one way or another. We've all experienced that uncomfortable, if exciting feeling of being new in a strange place. We've all had butterflies in our stomachs as we tried to figure out the rules, to decipher the code, to fit in. We have all needed to ask directions in a place we feel we should belong. We have all been outsiders, hoping to be let into the inner circle. We have all felt lonely and afraid. Yes, we know the heart of the stranger. Hopefully, most of us were lucky enough to have our fears calmed, help offered, information shared by hospitable people in the new place. Hopefully, most of us felt welcomed by the old-timers, and in time became one of them. You may have noticed that at services and what I did just a moment ago, Rabbi Spilker and I often encourage you to seek out someone you don't know and introduce yourselves. Our goal has been to fulfill our vision of being a welcoming community. We're serious about that here. We truly want every person who enters our doors as a stranger to feel they can leave as a friend who belongs. It is no accident that welcoming is the first word of our temple vision. We've made it a top priority year after year when our thematic focus is panim el panim, engaging with one another face to face. It's not just that we want to establish a welcoming culture around here. It is our mandate as a Jewish spiritual home. The Torah exhorts us repeatedly, you shall not wrong the stranger. You shall not oppress the stranger. Love the stranger. Why? Because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. Because we know how it feels. We know what the stranger needs. We know, that is, if we remember. Perhaps the one commandment that is even more emphatic than love the stranger is to remember where we came from. God reminds us right at the beginning of the 10 Commandments, I am Adonai your God, who led you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It is in the Kiddush we recite every Shabbat, except this one. It is in the main theme of Passover. Remember how it feels. Memory is a strange thing to command. regulating behavior makes sense, but here the Torah is legislating a thought. Perhaps it is against human nature to remember, especially the painful things. And God wants us to resist that very real urge to forget. It is more comfortable to forget the humble beginnings, the hard times, the suffering. It's more comfortable to focus on success and prosperity and to look forward to even better times. So let's do that for just a moment. Revel in the successes a bit. Despite the recent rise in anti-Semitism, America still is the wealthiest, most powerful, most numerous, and most secure Jewish community in history. We have much to be proud of and much to celebrate. We here at Mount Zion are so blessed. Every day I feel fortunate to be part of a wonderful leadership team supported by a fabulous staff. Look around at this beautiful space we have to worship in and the warm, committed, creative people we worship with. Our Summit Avenue address is testimony that we Jews have made it here in the Twin Cities. We can live and work and play wherever we want. We have 20 synagogues representing broad religious Jewish diversity, 2 thriving JCCs, 2 Jewish day schools, 2 federations, Shalom Community Alliance, Hadroff Epstein Funeral Home, Jewish theater and a thriving Jewish arts community, a Jewish newspaper, and an alphabet soup of Jewish social justice, communal, and special interest organizations. And we also have much to remember. The first group of Jewish refugees to arrive at the shores of New Amsterdam in 1654 were almost turned away by Peter Stuyvesant. In the 1930s, our shores were closed to Jewish refugees fleeing Hitler's Europe. We've been subject to anti-Semitism, intimidation, and slander. We have been refused jobs and been excluded from universities. We have had crosses burned on our lawns. Not so long ago, the Twin Cities were among the most anti-Semitic towns in America. In Minneapolis, Jewish doctors had to open their own hospital because they weren't allowed to practice in the existing hospitals. There's a synagogue in Virginia, Minnesota, because 100 years ago we were not welcome in the Twin Cities. So Jews who came to Minnesota looking for a better life had to go north to the Iron Range. Even as accepted and integrated as we are now, we still feel the pain when teachers, coaches, or employers schedule important events, projects, marathons during our high holy days. My point is that even though we are very comfortable now, or perhaps because we are so, it's important to remember where we came from and how we got here. I'd like to share with you an excerpt from the autobiography of Jacob Dabrowski, my grandfather. May his memory be a blessing. This is how he remembered his journey from the old country in 1898. Chapter 2, 1897 to 1903. Those were perilous times for the Jewish people all over Russia. There were many pogromen all over the country, and conditions were becoming more and more critical all the time. One day there was much excitement because we received a letter from our Uncle David in England. That Friday night after Shabbos dinner, Father called us all in and told us that he had decided to go to England and see what it looks like, and if he could get settled there, he would send for us. I've always thought what a lucky break it was for all of us that Father made that decision when he did. Otherwise, there probably would not be any of us here right now. As soon as the initial excitement and surprise of Father's announcement wore off, the complications began to pile up. Father was not eligible to get a government passport or permission to leave Russia. The only thing left to do was to try to cross the frontiers through illegal agents. The agents charged terrific prices, not only because of the risk involved, but because they knew that the frightened Jews had no alternative and would pay whatever price was asked. It was very dangerous, and many lives were lost in the attempts. Father left for England in March of 1897, and we left about September of 1898. Though the preparations for the trip were difficult and complicated, I was devoured with excitement and eagerness. We had to go almost all the way across Russia to get to the place where we would take the boat. And then after several days on the boat, we landed in Libau and took a boat from there to England. In those days, boats were mostly combined freight and passenger ships. And I guess our boat was mostly freight. There was even livestock aboard. The food was very poor. But as it turned out, that was no problem. Every one of us got sick a half hour after we got on the boat. And I don't remember seeing anything until about the day we landed. The Black Sea was very rough, and the boat we were on was very small. Many is the time that I wished we had never started the whole thing. My first reaction to the sights of London was that it scared me, like being on a different planet, surrounded by strange-looking people, the likes of which I had never seen before. The great tall buildings, the tramways rushing so fast, and the brightly lit streets all astonished me. And the people were so different from the Russian people that I was tongue-tied with wonder. I'm guessing that many of your parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents could tell a similar story, or some a far more harrowing story. And of course, there are those of our relatives who never even made it. So we remember that we were strangers. We remember so that we can fulfill Exodus's commandment not to wrong or oppress the stranger, so that we can go a step further and fulfill Deuteronomy's commandment to love the stranger. We repeat weekly in our Shabbat liturgy that welcoming the stranger is an obligation without measure, whose reward, too, is without measure. The most repeated of any commandment, it is echoed 36 times in the Torah, twice chai. Like remembering, welcoming often does not come naturally to us. The word stranger is telling. The dictionary defines it as one who is neither friend nor acquaintance, a foreigner, newcomer, or outsider. When we hear the word stranger, we hear the word strange. Stranger implies someone to be wary of. We are taught from the time we can talk not to talk to strangers. We teach our children about stranger danger. Outsider implies someone who is other, who is not like me, and whom I may not like. Foreigner is someone who will never be like me. So how can we fulfill this commandment to welcome, even love, the stranger? We can start by changing our language and think of welcoming the newcomer rather than the stranger. It might make it seem just a little easier and certainly friendlier. Even better would be to turn that person into an acquaintance or even a friend. There's a Hasidic story about a rabbi who asked his students, "How do you know when night has passed and the day is on its way back?" The first student answered, "Could it be when you can look at an animal in the distance and tell if it's a goat or a sheep?" "No," answered the rabbi. Another student thought that perhaps it was when you could look at a tree in the distance and tell whether it was a fig or an apple tree, but that was also wrong. "When is it then?" the students demanded. "It is when you can look on the face of any person and see a friend. Until you can do this, then no matter what time it is, it will always be night. When you look on the face of any person and can see a friend." Mount Zion Temple has a long history of welcoming newcomers. In his book of Our First 100 Years, Rabbi Plaut describes what happened when 200 refugees arrived in St. Paul on a Shabbat Eve in July of 1882. Immediately, the men and women of Mount Zion came to their aid, delivering food and raising funds to help them settle in their new American home. A few years later, the women of Mount Zion founded Neighborhood House to offer immigrants an environment where their culture, language, and customs were embraced, even as they were helped to become contributing members of their new community. Eventually, Neighborhood House was deeded to the city of St. Paul, but Mount Zion still maintains active involvement on the board and as volunteers. In the early 80s, we sponsored 4 Southeast Asian refugee families. In the 90s, we established a New Americans Committee. Every summer, we offer our home to homeless families seeking refuge from the street. And then, too, we make it a priority to really make our guests feel welcome, to feel as best as possible under the worst circumstances at home. As Rabbi Spilker mentioned on Rosh Hashanah, Mount Zion has signed on to the URJ's Brit Olam, Covenant with the World, which calls on us to defend the rights of immigrants at risk of deportation. Last year, we joined the highest welcome campaign, making a commitment to do refugee and immigrant justice work. HIAS was founded in 1881 as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society to assist Jews fleeing pogroms, but today serves refugees worldwide. Once, we helped refugees because they were Jewish. Today, we help refugees because we are Jewish. Our Tzedek Committee has been working diligently on the question of how Mount Zion will fulfill our commitment to immigrant justice. After months of research and study of the issues, they hosted 2 open meetings for the congregation. 97% of those attending supported Mount Zion officially becoming an immigrant justice congregation, and 67% supported investigating the feasibility of becoming a sanctuary congregation ready to house an individual or family at risk of deportation. Earlier this week, our Tzedek chairs presented a carefully drafted resolution to our executive committee, and in a few weeks, it will go to the board. Congregational bylaws and our commitment to process mean that resolutions like this take time to vet, approve, and enact. It will be a month or 2 before you see a congregational statement and action plan. But as the URJ's Religious Action Center says, we are called to respond to the urgency of now. As individuals, we certainly can do that, and as Jews, we must. Yom Kippur is a time to take an accounting of our soul's deepest recesses. Right now, I ask you to think about the stranger. Ask yourself, who is it that I think of as other, that I shrink from when I see them on the street or feel uncomfortable engaging with? Is it someone with a different color skin? Is it a woman wearing a hijab or a burqa? A man in a hoodie and sagging jeans? Is it someone whose gender isn't binary? Someone who is older or younger than me, or someone with a disability? Someone from a different socioeconomic class or political party? What would it take for the day to dawn and enable me to look at them and see a friend? Right now, as individuals, we can make an effort to learn more about the people in this country living with the risk of deportation. There are good resources at the URJ and HIAS websites. Right now, we can have conversations with one another about immigrant justice, and most importantly, listen carefully to one another. You are all invited to attend the board meeting on October 10th and be part of the discussion about what we will do as a congregation. In our Haftarah this morning, which we'll hear at the late service, Isaiah reminds us, if you remove the chains of oppression, the menacing hand, the malicious word, if you make sacrifices for the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall shine in the darkness, and your night become bright as noon. This afternoon, we will read from the Torah. When strangers live with you in your land, you must not oppress them. The strangers who live with you shall be to you like citizens, and you shall them as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So on this Yom Kippur day, when our stomachs are empty and our hearts are full, I issue a twofold challenge. In the coming year, let us commit to fulfilling our sacred obligation and realizing our vision as a welcoming and vibrant Jewish spiritual home in two ways. First, here in our Mount Zion community, I challenge you, and myself as well, to greet someone you don't know at every service, at every program or gathering you attend. Even if they are not newcomers, it will strengthen our community, and you might just brighten their day. If they are newcomers, reach out to them, take them under your wing, and help them to feel they belong. Second, in our St. Paul community, I challenge you and myself as well to make a commitment to learn about immigrant justice, to participate in the immigrant justice initiatives that the Tzedek Committee is developing. I assure you, there will be a wide variety of ways to become involved, ways that can take advantage of every individual's particular strengths, gifts, or wisdom. If we can meet these two challenges in the coming year, our light will surely shine in the darkness. I close with a poem that came to me when I realized just who the people are that need our help. I remember learning about the pilgrims in school, black hats, white collars, big buckle on their shoes. They came on boats, I learned, from a faraway land. My people came on boats too, in steerage, like cattle. I remember the smell. We all live here now, together, your people, my people, boat people, yearning to breathe free. Welcome.